Welcome to our media briefing. This is day 29, not day 30 like we mentioned on the floor. This is the fifth week of the legislative session. We have a little under 3 weeks to go. And let's see what else is going on. We had Senator Lee speak to us today on the floor. We welcome those who are watching us over the internet or listening. And we'll go ahead and start with questions from our media entourage.
Senator Adams, I want to ask you about your bill this morning, the home education amendments. Equality Utah says it's not going to cause them to drop their lawsuit over that part of the law. I wondered if you could talk about the litigation here and whether that was your intent.
Yeah, I'd let them speak for themselves as to what they do with their lawsuit. I think we're doing the right thing, and I don't know the legislation needs to be necessarily responsive to litigation. They'll make those comments and decide. But I do know that at least the word I'm getting was that there was a stay filed for on Friday, and that it might have been a joint stay. So I'm trying to get clarification as to what they say they're not dropping it, or they are.
Right, they say that there's more issues to pursue than just that language that you've highlighted in the bill, that there's other clarity they want in the state law.
Well, that's, again, that's their prerogative. I believe what we're actually formulating our statute, I think, in the best way possible, and the object is to try to protect children. And our sex education laws should focus on abstinence and fidelity, which they do. And they should do that in an equal way, focusing both on heterosexual and homosexual kids. There is absolutely, as you look at it, a correlation between sexually active kids and non-sexually active kids in both self-esteem and in other things they do. For example, alcohol consumption and drug abuse. So if we care about kids, we ought to focus on abstinence and fidelity, or no sexual activity before marriage, making sure that we focus on the value of marriage, and that ought to be our focus, and that's what we're trying to do here.
So how would you want a teacher to run with what happened today? What would be your expectation of what should happen in a classroom?
Well, 2 years ago, 2015, we passed, I think it was House Bill 477. Representative D was the primary sponsor. I carried it in the Senate. But it basically had an opt-in provision in that. And it gave criteria for sex education and how it might be rolled out. And it gave the opportunity for parents to be able to look at that. Most of this should be done in the home. I think most of us believe that sex education is best suited for the home environment. But if there's sex education in schools, the parents need to be involved in it, and that opt-in is required. So if you're going to talk about sex education in the school, it ought to be with that opt-in provision.
Did the AG's office, did they ask for this change, or was this just something that you were alerted to when this lawsuit was filed? It was generated from a lot of different sources. I think Equality Utah I've talked to them, and they actually are supportive of the change. They testified in committee that they were supportive of the bill. And then also our Attorney General brought it to our attention and felt like this was something that change that we ought to make. Did the Attorney General's office suggest that this might end the lawsuit?
I actually think they gave legal advice as to what our statute was, what was the best form of our statute. I don't know if they talked about whether it would end the lawsuit or not. Probably best talk to them about that.
Any other questions for Senator Adams? We have our Appropriations Chair here, Senator Stevenson, and also Senator Escamilla representing the Democratic Party. Senator Stevenson, anything on budget?
Well, this is probably old news, but it was when we did the additional appropriation, or not appropriation, but revenue calculations, it was additional money a considerable amount. I've asked some questions on where that came from, and it's very interesting. I look at my business and several people I've talked to, and they think a lot of that money may have come from Christmas bonuses. That I know that I gave larger Christmas bonuses last year than I've ever done before. And I know of other businesses that I've talked to did the same thing, and of course that all shows up in income tax. But there's been some very, of course it'd just be an estimate, but I know of some businesses that gave their employees enough that it would make a big difference on the income tax that employee paid. And I wasn't one of those, but I was generous, so. But that's one of the places. Then I think there was some thought processes that some people thought that when President Trump went in office that the economy would take a nosedive. And so there's some sell-offs from people who were trying to outguess the market. And we saw the same thing happen 2 years ago when there was anticipation of President Obama raising the capital gains tax. There was sell-offs prior to that. I thought maybe just the opposite would be happening this year with people holding their money to adjust for maybe President Trump dropping capital gains. But probably didn't happen, but it was a pleasant surprise. We should be able to get closer to meeting some of the needs of the state. We are still, my calculations right, we're about $160 million short of having or meeting the lists that were asked, or meeting the asks. So we never would want to meet all of those, but we certainly will be able to get a little closer. And I think some of those that there was probably some marginal things that were being left off that we would not have funded had we had a little more money, and now we have it. So we'll be able to take care of some more of those needs.
Are you allocating that money to the committees, or are you handling that in executive approach?
No, it'll be, the appropriations, the committees gave us, they all gave us a prioritized list, and we will look at those lists certainly as we go through the
So you're
appropriation
not going to send
process.
the committees back out to do more work?
No, I think we were asked that question last week, and we'd really like to try to avoid that if we can. We've got, with the number of bills we have in front of us, I think we've got a pretty busy session for the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
So in addition to the new money, you've got the money that was clawed back from the subcommittees that you didn't turn back to them?
That is correct, and they've all gone through an appropriation process, or they've realigned those priorities in the committee. For instance, education, we ask all the committees to hold back 2%, and then reprioritize that money, or look at it as far as putting it in a priority that they thought where it should be. And that they did that. They did a great job with it. And so we'll take now a look at, and then they gave us a list of ongoing and one-time appropriations. Very interesting year. We have a lot more ongoing money than we have one-time money to put out. And so we may see some one-time projects funded with ongoing money, and then of course that would make it available next year.
If structural imbalance is one-time money ongoing expenses being paid with one-time money, I wonder what that's called. Should we give it a name?
Well, we could call it, well, I'm not sure what we'd want to call that. We could probably come up with something very, I think very appropriate for what we do with it, though. That would be a
Structural rainy day fund. Is that right?
I've heard that before.
Yeah. Senator Escamilla, any thoughts from the Democratic Party on the new revenue number?
No, we were obviously pleased to hear.
Yes, we're all pleased about that.
Pleased to hear the numbers, and also we are working our own budget with the minority caucus in the House, and hopefully we can align. We feel great. I mean, the process of having the subcommittees work on that is very helpful. I think everyone has a voice in that process. So we are grateful as a minority party to have that process in place in our legislature. Very concerned, obviously, on social services because even with that process of the 2%, we know they were vital and critical services that were being cut or not making into our budget numbers. So we're hoping to see some of those backfill, I guess, with the new numbers. So that's just something we're going to be keeping an eye on that, and we appreciate the opportunity to bring forward our own points and some of those issues to the attention of the majority party, but also in executive appropriations.
I think we'll have, social services, as we look at that's one of the big rocks that we talk about that we need to fund. And that was one that they did an amazing job of cuts.
Mm.
And so I think as we look through that, I'm sure there will be some places to put some of this new money.
Any other questions?
Gonna see a tax bill soon?
We talked a little bit about that in joint leadership this morning, and the numbers came in a little unexpected, and so we have a little bit more work to do before we get a bill out.
The estimates of what the bill would do, is that what you meant?
Just the impacts of the bill.
Still structurally the same that you were talking about last
Sure.
week?
So we're talking conceptually here, and we're continuing to do that because it's good revenue policy, expanding the base and lowering the rates. But when you start to look at where that affects and what population affects, we have to make sure we're minimizing those impacts. All right,
Are you,
well, oh.
sorry, 12 and a half days left, 12 days almost. I mean, is it practical to push through a fairly significant tax reform in that window of time?
yeah, I think it's still, we still have a third, well, a little less than a third of the time left, and most of the bills pass it in the next 3 weeks anyway. I'm going to go up to the Democratic caucus for a few minutes and talk to them about proposal, at least the concepts we're working on, and tax reform back in 2007, I think was bipartisan. It got everybody's. There may have been a dissenting vote here or there, but it was pretty much unanimous by the time we got finished with it. But that was, I think that was passed in the last week too. I can't remember, but I was the sponsor of the bill. But I'm pretty sure that was in the last week. It took a little while to get everybody on board and work through some of the issues that we're just rediscovering again as we're trying to determine exactly what we do. Any other thoughts? Any questions? If not, anybody from on the internet?
Not today.
All right, thank you very much.
Just very quickly, I likened, when we received those new numbers on Friday, I likened them to going to a fish farm and throwing a handful of fish food out on top of the pond, watching the churn.
Big carp.